At Christmas, my dad barked at me and my 7-year-old, "You're both grounded." Then he told us to eat alone in an empty room. For a moment, nobody at the table reacted. The candles kept burning. Silverware hovered mid-air. Christmas music played softly from the living room like nothing unusual had happened. If someone had walked past the windows of my parents' house in Westport, Connecticut, they would have seen a perfect holiday dinner. Warm lights, polished dishes, a family gathered together. They wouldn't have seen my daughter freezing beside me. Her name is Maya, and her feet didn't quite reach the floor as she sat in the tall dining chair. Snow still clung to the cuffs of her pants from playing outside before dinner. She looked from my father to me, confused, searching for the part where someone laughed and said it was a joke. No one did. My father, Richard Hale, stood at the head of the table, carving knife still in his hand. His voice hadn't been loud, but it carried the same authority it always had, the tone that ended conversations when I was a child. My mother, Caroline, adjusted a napkin beside her plate, as if correcting small imperfections mattered more than what had just happened. "You need to learn respect," she added calmly. Across from us, my younger brother Daniel lowered his eyes to his plate. His wife reached for her wineglass without speaking. Their daughter, Ellie, continued eating, unaware that the atmosphere had shifted into something sharp and invisible. Maya swallowed. I was just asking," she said softly. Her voice trembled slightly, and that sound pulled me back years, to another Christmas, another table, another version of myself learning when to stay quiet. The question she had asked still echoed in my mind. "When do we get the thing Great-Grandma said she left so we'd always be safe?" Simple, honest, dangerous apparently. My father placed the knife down with deliberate care. "That is not appropriate dinner conversation," he said. Maya's shoulders curled inward immediately. "I'm sorry." The apology came so fast it hurt to hear. No one had asked for it yet. She'd learned to offer it automatically. I reached over and covered her small hand with mine. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the room. "You don't need to apologize," I said quietly. My mother's smile tightened. "Lauren," she warned, my name sounding less like affection and more like correction. "In this house," my father added, sitting back in his chair, "children know their place." The words landed heavier than the punishment itself. I felt the old instinct rise inside me. Smooth things over, keep peace, make it easier. It had worked my entire life. Apologize, redirect, pretend nothing mattered enough to fight about. But Maya looked up at me then, not crying, just waiting. Waiting to learn what she was supposed to do when adults decided she was wrong for being curious. My father pointed toward the hallway. "Go to the den," he said. "You'll eat there, alone." The den wasn't really a room, just a spare space with a folding table, used mostly for storage. A place designed to separate, not include. The rest of the family stayed silent. No one objected, not even softly. I realized something uncomfortable in that moment. They weren't shocked. They were watching, waiting to see if I would comply the way I always had. Maya's grip tightened around my hand. "Mom," she whispered. I felt the shift happen inside me, quiet but irreversible. This wasn't discipline. It was a reminder. A reminder that no matter how old I was, no matter that I had my own home, my own child, my own life, in this house, I was still expected to obey. I pushed my chair back slowly. The scrape against hardwood sounded louder than it should have. "We're not doing that," I said calmly. My father's expression hardened. "Excuse me?" She asked a question, I replied. "That's not disrespect." My mother let out a small laugh meant to soften tension. "You're a guest here." The sentence hung between us like a boundary line. Maya shifted closer to me, sensing the change even if she didn't understand it. My father stood again, jaw tight. "You're both grounded," he repeated, louder this time. "Now go." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier, and for the first time since arriving that evening, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about manners. It was a test. Not of my daughter. Of whether I would finally stop playing the role they had written for me years ago. I stood up, still holding Maya's hand, and every eye at the table followed us. For a few seconds after I stood, no one moved. The room held its breath, suspended between expectation and disbelief. My father remained at the head of the table, waiting for the familiar ending. The one where I sighed, apologized, and guided Maya quietly toward punishment so dinner could continue uninterrupted. That had always been the pattern. Conflict appeared, I absorbed it, peace returned. But Maya's small hand trembled inside mine, and something in me refused to repeat the script. "We've already eaten," I said evenly. It wasn't true. We had barely touched our plates. But the sentence wasn't about food. It was about refusal. My mother blinked, startled. "Lauren, don't be dramatic." Across the table, Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. His silence felt louder than agreement. Ellie kept swinging her legs beneath her chair, unaware that the adults had crossed an invisible line. My father's voice sharpened. "Sit down." The command landed with the weight of years behind it. Childhood mornings, teenage arguments, every moment when obedience had been easier than resistance. I didn't sit. Instead, I helped Maya slide carefully from her chair. Her boots tapped softly against the floor. She stayed close to my side, eyes darting between faces that suddenly looked unfamiliar to her. "We're leaving," I said. The words shocked even me once they were spoken aloud. My mother laughed lightly, but the sound cracked halfway through. "Over a correction?" "It wasn't a correction," I replied. "You tried to humiliate her." My father stepped forward, blocking part of the hallway. "You are overreacting." Maya pressed against my arm. "I didn't mean to be bad," she whispered. The sentence hit harder than anything else that night. I crouched slightly so she could hear me clearly. "You weren't bad," I said softly. "You were brave enough to ask something." Her eyes searched mine, uncertain but hopeful. Behind us, chairs shifted. Someone cleared their throat. The normal sounds of dinner tried to resume, but the illusion had already broken. My father's tone lowered, colder now. "You will not walk out of this house like this." I straightened slowly. "Watch me." The front hallway felt longer than I remembered. Christmas decorations lined the walls, framed photos, garlands, stockings carefully labeled with each family member's name. Mine still hung there. So did Maya's. The sight made my chest tighten. Behind us, footsteps approached quickly. Daniel's voice came low and urgent. "Just apologize so we can move on." I turned briefly. Move on from what? Punishing a child for asking about safety? He didn't answer. Because there wasn't a good one. My mother appeared near the doorway, arms crossed. "You're teaching her disrespect." "No," I said quietly. "I'm teaching her she doesn't have to shrink to keep people comfortable." The front door opened, and cold December air rushed in, cutting through the heavy warmth of the house. Snow crunched under our boots as we stepped outside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The porch lights cast long shadows across the driveway. From inside, laughter restarted. Forced, louder than before, as if volume alone could erase what had happened. Maya looked up at me. "Are they mad forever?" I knelt beside her, brushing snow from her sleeve. "People get mad when things change," I said gently. "That doesn't mean we did something wrong." She nodded slowly, absorbing the idea. Behind us, the door opened again. My mother's voice followed us into the cold. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe." But the word mistake didn't feel frightening anymore. I buckled Maya into her car seat while she watched the glowing house through the window. It looked beautiful from outside, warm, welcoming, untouched by conflict. Appearances had always mattered there. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The heater hummed to life, filling the silence between us. My phone buzzed immediately. "Dad." I ignored it. We drove through quiet Westport streets lined with lights and decorated trees. Snow reflected gold and red across the windshield. After a few minutes, Maya spoke again. "Mom, am I grounded?" The seriousness in her voice almost broke me. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "No," I said softly. "People don't ground adults." The word surprised me as much as her. Because for most of my life, I had lived as if they could. My phone buzzed again. This time, I glanced down at the message when we stopped at a red light. "Come back. Apologize. Now." Another followed instantly from my mother. "You need to learn your place." The light turned green. I placed the phone face down and drove on. And somewhere between their house and ours, a memory surfaced. My great-grandmother's quiet voice months earlier, handing me a card and saying something I hadn't understood at the time. If they ever punish her for asking questions, call him. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, because suddenly I knew tonight wasn't finished yet. Home felt smaller than usual when we walked in, but warmer. Not the polished warmth of my parents' house. No perfect decorations or carefully arranged centerpieces. Just soft lamplight, mismatched furniture, and the faint smell of vanilla from a candle I'd forgotten to blow out earlier. Maya slipped off her boots without being asked and lined them neatly beside the door. She moved carefully, like loud sounds might cause someone to correct her again. I hung our coats and watched her for a moment. The silence here wasn't heavy. It was safe. Hot chocolate? I asked. Her face brightened immediately. With marshmallows? Extra, I promised. In the kitchen, I warmed milk while she climbed onto a stool, pulling her knees close to her chest. The small, everyday sounds, spoon against mug, cabinet doors opening, steadied my breathing in a way I hadn't realized I needed. My phone buzzed on the counter, then again, and again. I didn't look. Tonight, ignoring it felt like closing a door. Maya traced circles on the countertop with her fingertip. Grandpa sounded really mad. I stirred slowly. Sometimes adults get upset when they don't like a question. She thought about that carefully. I didn't want anyone to fight. I know, I said softly. She wrapped both hands around the mug when I placed it in front of her, letting the warmth settle into her fingers. After a moment, she whispered, I always say sorry so people feel better. The honesty of it caught me off guard. I crouched beside her so we were eye level. Saying sorry is for when you hurt someone, I said gently. Not for when you're curious. She nodded, though uncertainty lingered. We moved to the living room afterward, sitting on the rug while she sorted colored pencils into careful rows. Every few minutes she glanced at me, waiting. Maybe for punishment. Maybe for the moment the evening would suddenly turn serious again. It didn't. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. Eventually, curiosity won. Are they going to call forever? She asked. Probably for a little while, I admitted. She frowned. Will they stop loving us? The question tightened my chest. I brushed her hair back gently. Love doesn't disappear because someone asks a question. Even as I said it, I understood something new. Sometimes access disappears instead, and that can be healthier. My phone lit up again across the room, screen glowing insistently. Dad? Mom? Dad again. I picked it up at last and played the voicemail. My father's voice filled the room, calm but sharp. You will bring Maya back tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Family meeting. You will apologize. She will apologize. Otherwise, you are not welcome in this family. The message ended with a click. No yelling, just conditions. I set the phone down slowly. Maya watched my face. Are we going back? I looked around our living room. Drawings taped crookedly to the wall, blankets folded imperfectly on the couch, a puzzle half-finished on the coffee table. Nothing here required pretending. No, I said quietly. She nodded once and returned to coloring, accepting the answer without fear. Later, after bedtime stories and tucked-in blankets, she hugged me tightly. I liked when you said I wasn't bad, she murmured sleepily. I'll always tell you the truth, I whispered. When she finally drifted off, I stayed in the doorway longer than usual, watching her breathing slow. The house felt incredibly still. I walked back to the kitchen and finally checked my phone properly. Dozens of messages waited, some angry, some pleading, some pretending nothing serious had happened. One phrase repeated again and again, learn your place. I stared at the words until they stopped feeling personal and started feeling familiar. A rule. One I had followed for most of my life without noticing. I opened my notes app and began writing down everything that had happened. Times, messages, exact wording. Not emotional, just factual. Documenting it made the night feel clearer, almost distant. If you've ever reached a moment where you stop reacting and simply start observing, you know how strange that calm feels, like stepping outside a storm while everyone else is still shouting inside it. When I finished, I set the phone down and leaned against the counter. And that was when the memory returned fully. My great-grandmother standing at the sink months earlier, pressing a small card into my hand. If they ever punish her for asking, don't argue. My heartbeat slowed, because suddenly I understood. Tonight wasn't the conflict. It was the signal. And for the first time, I realized I already knew exactly what I needed to do next. The kitchen felt colder after midnight, not physically. The heater clicked on and off like usual, but emotionally, as if the house itself understood something had shifted. I stood at the counter staring at my phone, my parents' messages stacked one over another, each demanding urgency I no longer felt obligated to give. Outside, snow drifted quietly past the window. Inside, a memory began replaying with uncomfortable clarity. It was late summer, months before my great-grandmother Ruth Hale passed away. The house had been loud that day. Cousins outside, music playing near the patio, my parents hosting one of their carefully orchestrated gatherings. Ruth and I had escaped to the kitchen under the excuse of drying dishes. She moved slowly but deliberately, her hands steady despite her age. The faucet ran at a low stream, masking our conversation from the noise outside. Maya asks questions the way I used to, she said casually. I smiled. She definitely does. Ruth studied me for a moment longer than expected. If they ever punish her for asking, she said quietly. Don't argue. I laughed softly at the time. Punish her? For questions? Her expression didn't change. You won't win a shouting match in this family, she said. You'll only teach her that love depends on staying quiet. The words had felt dramatic then, the kind of warning older relatives sometimes gave when reflecting on the past. Now they felt precise. She dried her hands carefully and reached into the pocket of her apron, pulling out a small folded card. She pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. A man named Martin, she said. He handles my financial matters. I looked down at the card, confused. Why would I need this? Her eyes softened. Because I promised Maya she would always be safe. I remember smiling politely, assuming she meant emotional safety, family support, something symbolic. I hadn't understood she meant protection built into something real. Back in the present, I opened the hall closet and reached for the plastic storage bin where I kept the small things Ruth had given me over the years. Recipe cards, old photographs, a crocheted blanket Maya loved. The lid creaked softly as I lifted it. The scent of cedar drifted upward. For a moment I hesitated, wondering if opening it would confirm something I wasn't ready to face. But the image of Maya apologizing at dinner pushed me forward. I sifted through folded fabric until my fingers touched laminated paper. The recipe card. I turned it over. Neat handwriting. Martin S. a phone number written clearly beneath. My chest tightened. I sat on the floor holding it, remembering how firmly Ruth had pressed it into my hand that afternoon. Don't warn anyone. Don't negotiate. At the time, it had sounded unnecessary. Now it sounded like preparation. Down the hallway, Maya shifted in her sleep, the faint creak of her bed grounding me again. I pictured her face at the dinner table, confused, apologetic, trying to understand rules that changed without explanation. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. It was about patterns. After Ruth's funeral, I remembered asking my father if I could see the estate documents, just to understand what had been arranged. He hadn't even looked up from sorting papers. There's nothing for you to worry about, he'd said. My mother had added gently, your father is handling everything. And I had accepted that answer because arguing felt exhausting. Tonight, that memory felt different, deliberate, controlled. I placed the card carefully on the kitchen table beside my phone. The messages continued arriving, missed calls, texts shifting between anger and concern. You're escalating this. Call us immediately. I didn't respond. For the first time, silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like choosing when to speak. I sat down, staring at the number written in Ruth's handwriting. If she had expected this moment, then Christmas dinner hadn't been an accident. It had been inevitable. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights sliding across the ceiling before disappearing again. I realized something then that made my pulse steady instead of race. My parents weren't angry because Maya had been rude. They were afraid because she had mentioned something they thought they controlled. I picked up the card again, turning it between my fingers. The decision didn't feel dramatic, just clear, because sometimes the bravest thing isn't confronting people directly. Sometimes it's quietly stepping outside the system they expect you to stay inside. And for the first time since leaving my parents' house, I knew exactly what I was about to do next. The number sat on the table longer than I expected. I told myself I was thinking it through, giving everyone time to cool down, making sure I wasn't overreacting. But the truth was simpler. Dialing it meant accepting that what happened at Christmas dinner wasn't just another family argument. It meant something larger had already been set in motion. My phone buzzed again. Dad. I watched it ring until it stopped. A message followed immediately. You are making this worse than it needs to be. Another from my mother appeared seconds later. We love Maya. Don't turn this into something ugly. The words looked gentle, but underneath them sat the same message they had repeated my entire life. Cooperate, apologize, restore order. I turned the phone face down. Across the house, the hallway light glowed softly beneath Maya's bedroom door. Knowing she was asleep made the silence heavier and clearer. I opened my notes app and began typing. Time of dinner. Exact wording. Messages received. Martin's name sat at the top of the recipe card beside me, steady and patient, as if Ruth had known I would hesitate. I stood and checked on Maya again. She slept curled around her stuffed rabbit, one arm stretched across the pillow. Her breathing was slow, peaceful, completely unaware of the arguments happening around her. Safe. That word finally felt important. Ruth hadn't promised comfort. She had promised safety. Back in the kitchen, I gathered documents without fully realizing why. My driver's license, Maya's birth certificate, school records from a folder in the cabinet. Something about preparing made the decision feel real. Another voicemail arrived. I played it. My father's voice filled the room, controlled but sharp. You will bring Maya back tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, family meeting. You will apologize. Otherwise, you are not welcome in this family. The message ended abruptly. No discussion. Just terms. I stared at the screen, waiting for fear to follow. It didn't. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Distance. As if the authority behind his words no longer reached me. The kitchen clock clicked to 9 p.m. I sat down, placed the recipe card beside my phone, and rested my hands flat on the table until they stopped trembling. What if I was wrong? What if calling made everything worse? Then Maya's voice echoed in my mind. Did I do something bad? That answered it. I dialed. The line rang once, twice. A calm voice answered. Martin speaking. My throat felt tight. Hi, this is Lauren Hale, Ruth's granddaughter. There was a brief pause. Not confusion, not surprise. Recognition. I was wondering when you'd call, he said quietly. My grip tightened around the phone. She told me to contact you if my parents ever punished my daughter for asking a question. Another pause followed. Then his tone shifted. Professional, focused. Are you safe right now? The question startled me. Yes, I said quickly. We left. Maya's asleep. Good, he replied. I can't discuss details fully over the phone tonight, but I can confirm I'm involved with arrangements your grandmother made concerning your child. My heart pounded. My parents are acting like they control everything, I admitted. Martin exhaled slowly. Here's what you need to do, he said. You don't sign anything. You don't attend family meetings. And you document every message they send. I glanced at the growing list on my phone. I already started. Good, he said. I need to meet you in person. First business day. Bring identification and your daughter's birth certificate. I looked at the documents stacked beside me. I have them ready. A brief silence followed before he added gently, Lauren, they do not get to discipline a beneficiary into silence. The word hit me hard. Beneficiary. When the call ended, the house felt different. Not quieter. Protected. I sat there for a long time afterward, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the normal sounds of a life that suddenly felt more solid. For the first time since Christmas dinner, the confusion faded. Maya hadn't uncovered a misunderstanding. She had uncovered something my parents believed belonged to them, and now they knew I understood it too. Every time I closed my eyes, the dinner replayed itself differently. My father's fork stopping midair, my mother's laugh arriving too quickly, Daniel refusing to look at me. Details I had ignored for years suddenly rearranged into something deliberate. By morning, the snow had turned gray along the sidewalks, pushed into uneven piles by passing cars. I moved through our routine carefully, keeping everything normal for Maya. Breakfast, hair brushed, backpack zipped. She watched me closely while tying her shoes. "Are we still in trouble?" she asked. I knelt in front of her. "No," I said gently. "We're just taking care of something important." She nodded, satisfied enough, and hugged me before running inside her winter program building. I stayed in the car a moment longer after she disappeared through the doors. Then I drove downtown. Martin's office sat between two ordinary storefronts. Nothing impressive, nothing dramatic. A glass door, a small brass sign, quiet professionalism. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd miss it entirely. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Martin stood when I entered, offering a firm handshake. He looked exactly like he sounded on the phone. Calm, practical, uninterested in drama. "Lauren," he said, "come in." His office was organized with almost surgical precision. Files labeled clearly, shelves aligned, a single folder waiting on the desk. Before sitting, he asked, "Has anyone asked you to sign documents since Ruth passed?" "No," I said. "They kept telling me everything was handled." He nodded once, unsurprised. Then he turned the folder toward me. The label read, "Maya Hale Trust." My breath caught. "Your grandmother established a miners' trust," Martin explained. "Your daughter is the beneficiary." I stared at the words, trying to process them. "So my parents weren't managing anything?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Your father was managing appearances." He slid a chart across the desk. "Beneficiary, Maya Hale. Legal parent, Lauren Hale. Trustee, Evergreen Fiduciary Services. Institutional, no family member has authority," he said. That was intentional. A strange mix of relief and anger settled in my chest. "Then why did they react like that at dinner?" I asked. Martin leaned back slightly. "Because Maya mentioned the one thing they cannot control." He opened another section of the file and placed printed emails in front of me. My father's name appeared immediately. The messages were polite, professional, and strategic. Requests about financial oversight. Questions regarding procedures for guardianship of trust assets. Daniel's wife had followed with a message offering family involvement for stability. My hands felt cold. "They barely see her," I said quietly. "They were preparing to petition for authority over distributions," Martin replied. "Not custody. Money." A draft petition sat beneath the emails. "Dated weeks before Christmas." "They planned this before dinner," I whispered. "Yes," Martin said gently. And when Maya asked about safety publicly, it confirmed the trust existed. That created urgency for them. The room felt suddenly smaller. "They weren't embarrassed," I said slowly. "They were afraid." Martin didn't argue. "Ruth anticipated conflict," he explained. "That's why professional oversight was built in, and why she instructed you to call." He turned his computer screen toward me. "I recommend we immediately restrict communication with the trustee to verified parties only. That prevents interference." "Yes," I said without hesitation. He drafted the notice while I watched, attaching copies of my ID and Maya's birth certificate. The language was simple, factual, powerful because it contained no emotion. When I signed, my hand felt steady. Martin sent the email, then printed a copy and placed it in a folder. "Keep this," he said, "and don't let anyone else hold the paperwork again." Outside, cold air rushed between buildings as I stepped onto the street. My phone buzzed instantly. "Dad." I didn't answer. For the first time, urgency belonged to them, not me. If you've ever realized that calm preparation is stronger than reacting in anger, you understand why walking back to my car felt strangely peaceful. Because the truth had shifted something fundamental. My father's authority had never come from law or ownership. It had come from assumption. And assumptions don't survive documentation. The calls started before I even left the parking lot. My phone vibrated repeatedly against the passenger seat, the screen lighting up again and again with my father's name. I watched it ring while fastening my seatbelt, noticing something new in my reaction. I wasn't nervous. I was curious. I let the call go to voicemail. A message arrived seconds later. "Call me immediately." Another followed from my mother. "There's been a misunderstanding with the trustee. Fix this. Fix this." The same phrase they had used my entire life whenever something slipped outside their control. I started the car and pulled into traffic, the city moving normally around me. People crossing streets, coffee shops busy, winter coats rushing past storefront windows. The world looked unchanged, even though mine had shifted completely. The phone rang again. This time I answered. "What did you do?" my father demanded without greeting. His voice sounded tight, controlled in a way that revealed strain underneath. "I told the truth," I said calmly. A pause followed, not silence, but recalculation. "The trustee is refusing to speak to us," he said. "They claim communication must go through legal channels." "Yes," I replied. "That's correct." "You had no right?" "I'm her parent," I interrupted quietly. The words surprised both of us. Another pause. Then anger returned, louder now. "You're escalating this unnecessarily." I watched a pedestrian cross the street before answering. "No, I'm clarifying it." He exhaled sharply and hung up. For years, that sound, the abrupt end of a call, would have left me shaking. Now it felt like confirmation. They were reacting, not directing. By the time I picked Maya up that afternoon, my phone held 12 missed calls and a string of messages growing increasingly urgent. "We need to talk. Family doesn't involve outsiders. You're creating problems that didn't exist." Maya climbed into the back seat, proudly holding up a paper snowflake. "Look, I didn't tear it this time." "It's perfect," I said, smiling. Her world still operated on effort and encouragement, not control and strategy. Sitting there beside her, I realized how carefully Ruth had designed everything, not to create conflict, but to prevent it from swallowing Maya the way it had shaped me. As we drove home, Maya chatted about snacks and games while my phone buzzed endlessly beside me. At a red light, another message appeared from my mother. "Your father is very hurt." I almost laughed. Hurt had always been their strongest argument, emotion used as leverage. I placed the phone face down again. That evening, after dinner, I finally opened the family group chat. Photos from Christmas dinner filled the screen. Smiling faces, dessert plates, captions about wonderful family moments. My absence had already been rewritten into something smaller. Then my mother posted, "We hope Lauren finds her way back to respect and unity." Replies followed quickly. Sympathy, confusion, neutral comments from relatives unsure what had happened. The narrative was forming without me. I closed the chat. Martin's words echoed clearly. Documentation, not emotion. An hour later, a knock sounded at the door. A courier stood outside holding a thick envelope. I signed automatically and closed the door, setting the packet on the kitchen table while Maya worked on homework nearby. "Is that important?" she asked. "Probably," I said. When she went to wash her hands, I opened it. Legal documents. My brother's name appeared near the top. "Petition for emergency appointment." Words jumped out immediately. "Unstable decision-making, concerning behavior, family intervention recommended." I read every page slowly. They weren't trying to pressure me anymore. They were trying to go around me. Maya returned and sat across from me, humming softly while coloring. The normalcy of the moment steadied my breathing. For the first time since Christmas, fear didn't arrive. Clarity did, because panic sounds different than anger. And suddenly, I understood exactly which one I was hearing from them now. I read the petition 3 times before calling Martin. Each pass made the language clearer and colder. It never accused me directly of being a bad mother. Instead, it suggested concern, instability, emotional reactions that might impact long-term decision-making. Carefully chosen words designed to sound protective while quietly removing authority. It was almost impressive. Almost. They filed faster than expected. Martin said after listening quietly while I summarized it. But that usually means they're relying on pressure, not evidence. What happens now? I asked. We respond with facts, he said simply. Bring everything. The following morning felt strangely normal. I packed Maya's lunch, helped her find matching socks, and listened to her explain an argument about crayons at school, as if nothing in the adult world had shifted beneath us. Before getting out of the car, she leaned forward. You're not sad anymore, she observed. I blinked, surprised. Why do you think that? You breathe different, she said, then ran inside. Kids notice truth before adults admit it. The courthouse stood downtown, gray stone against a pale winter sky. Inside, the hallway smelled like damp coats and old paper. People waited on wooden benches holding folders that looked just like mine. My parents stood near the far wall. My mother dabbed carefully at dry eyes with a tissue, already prepared for sympathy. My father stood straight beside her, expression controlled but tight. Daniel flipped through papers while avoiding my gaze entirely. No one greeted me. Martin sat several rows behind, exactly as promised, present but not speaking for me. When our case was called, we stepped forward. The judge adjusted her glasses and scanned the documents. Emergency petitions require immediate risk, she said plainly. Explain the urgency. Daniel spoke first, voice measured. We're concerned about Maya's stability and recent isolation from extended family. Isolation. The word echoed strangely in the quiet room. The judge raised a hand. Concern is not an emergency. I opened my binder and handed copies to the clerk. Screenshots of messages, timestamps, voicemail transcripts, the demand for apologies, the threats of exclusion. I spoke calmly. My daughter was punished for asking about a trust established for her protection. After I declined to comply, my family attempted to pursue authority over that trust without informing me. The courtroom grew very still. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. She turned toward my father. Why are relatives requesting authority when a professional trustee exists? My father hesitated. Because Lauren is making cooperation difficult, he said finally. The judge looked directly at him. This court does not enforce family hierarchy. The sentence landed like a door closing. 10 minutes later, the decision came. Petition denied. No emergency conditions. Restrictions placed against interference with trustee communications or parental authority. Simple, direct, final. Outside the courtroom, my mother's composure cracked first. You're tearing this family apart, she whispered sharply. I paused, meeting her eyes. No, I said quietly. I stopped pretending everything was fine. My father said nothing. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Not angry, not commanding, just unsure of what came next without control guiding the outcome. I walked past them toward the exit. Cold air filled my lungs as the courthouse doors opened, sharper than expected but easier to breathe. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. Winning didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, like pressure releasing slowly after years of holding it in. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages from relatives began appearing. Confusion replacing certainty as news traveled faster than explanations. I didn't answer yet, because something important had shifted. The story was no longer being told only from one side. And once silence enters a courtroom, truth doesn't need to shout anymore. Losing in court didn't make my family stop. It just changed their strategy. The messages began the next morning. Not from my parents this time, but from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. Is everything okay? Your mom said you're keeping Maya away from everyone. What's really going on? I stared at the screen, recognizing the pattern immediately. My mother had moved the conflict into public space, where sympathy worked faster than facts. If she told the story first, she shaped how everyone understood it. I opened the family group chat carefully. Her message sat at the top. Lauren has chosen to distance herself from the family. We hope she finds peace and remembers what respect looks like. Below it, my father added, Maya will always have a place here. Lauren won't. The words tightened something in my chest. Not pain, but clarity. Separate the child from the parent. Make it sound loving. I locked my phone and set it down. The old version of me would have responded instantly, explaining every detail, defending myself sentence by sentence. But Martin's advice echoed clearly. Facts don't argue, they stand. That afternoon, while Maya worked on spelling homework at the table, I opened the folder Martin had given me after the hearing. Inside was a document I had skimmed earlier but never fully processed. A trust summary listing protected assets connected to Maya's beneficiary status. One line stopped me completely. Residential property held under trust protection for the benefit of the minor beneficiary. The address beneath it was unmistakable. My parents' house. I read it twice, then a third time. Ruth hadn't only protected money, she had structured the house itself under the trust, which meant something simple and explosive at once. My parents' right to live there depended on compliance with the trust's conditions, including treatment of the beneficiary and her legal guardian. Suddenly, their urgency made perfect sense. I sat back slowly, absorbing it. This wasn't revenge. It was prevention. My phone buzzed again. Another relative asking why I had cut everyone off. I opened the group chat. For a moment, my fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then I attached a single PDF. No explanation. No accusations. Just the trust summary. Above it, I typed one sentence. This property is part of Maya's trust protections. Any exclusion of her legal parent violates those terms. I pressed send. Silence followed instantly. Not gradual, immediate. The typing indicator appeared, vanished, returned again. Finally, my uncle replied, "Wait, what does this mean?" Another cousin added, "Are you serious right now?" My mother responded quickly, "That's being misunderstood. But documents don't misunderstand. They don't argue or cry or change tone. They simply exist." Daniel didn't respond at all. I watched the conversation shift in real time, confusion replacing certainty, questions replacing quiet agreement. For the first time, the narrative wasn't about me being dramatic. It was about why my parents had tried so hard to control something they didn't actually own. Across the table, Maya looked up from her homework. "Mom, how do you spell brave?" The question caught me off guard. "Brave," I said. She wrote it carefully, then smiled to herself. I realized then that none of this, courtrooms, paperwork, arguments, was the real victory. The real change was smaller. She wasn't apologizing before speaking anymore. That evening, my father finally called again. I answered. "What did you do?" he demanded. But the anger sounded thinner now. "I shared the truth," I said calmly. "You're humiliating us." I looked at my daughter coloring quietly nearby. "No," I said. "I stopped protecting lies." He hung up without another word. The house felt peaceful afterward. Outside, winter settled deeper over the neighborhood, lights glowing softly in nearby windows. For the first time since Christmas dinner, uncertainty faded. The truth wasn't whispered anymore. It was visible. And once people see something clearly, pretending becomes very hard. The official notice arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Certified mail. I recognized the envelope immediately. Thick paper, formal print, the kind that carried decisions rather than opinions. Maya sat at the table eating cereal while I signed for it at the door, unaware that another quiet shift was about to happen. "Is it important?" she asked. "Yes," I said gently. "But it's grown-up important." She nodded and went back to carefully separating marshmallows from cereal pieces, fully trusting that whatever arrived belonged to my world, not hers. I waited until she left for school before opening it. Inside was a formal notice from the trustee. Clear language, no emotion. It confirmed restrictions placed after the court ruling. No interference with the beneficiary, no attempts to exclude the legal parent, and no pressure related to trust management. Continued violations could result in termination of occupancy rights connected to the property. I read the last sentence twice. Ruth hadn't built punishment into the system. She had built boundaries. My phone rang almost immediately after. "Dad," I answered. His voice sounded different, controlled, careful. "We should move forward," he said. "There's no reason to keep fighting." I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching sunlight spread across the floor. "Moving forward means respecting boundaries," I replied. A pause followed. "Of course," he said finally. Not agreement. Acceptance. The call ended quickly. For the first time in my life, authority didn't come from volume or intimidation. It came from structure, from preparation someone had made long before I understood why. Weeks passed. The calls slowed. Family conversations softened into neutral territory. Some relatives stopped asking questions altogether once the facts became impossible to ignore. Others reached out quietly, conversations no longer shaped by my parents' version of events. The drama faded, and in its place, something better grew. Maya changed in small ways that felt enormous. She stopped apologizing when asking for help, stopped whispering questions like they might cause trouble. One afternoon at the park, I watched her walk up to another child and calmly say, "It's my turn now." No hesitation, no fear, just certainty. I realized she wasn't learning confidence. She was unlearning caution. A letter arrived near the end of winter, forwarded through Martin's office. The envelope carried handwriting I recognized instantly. Ruth's. Maya sat beside me on the couch, sounding out the words slowly. "You were brave enough to ask questions," the letter read. "So I made sure you would always be safe." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't hide them. She didn't apologize either. She leaned into me instead. "Great-grandma knew?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly. "She knew you deserved choices." That night, after Maya fell asleep, I stood in her doorway longer than usual, listening to her steady breathing. The house felt calm in a way I hadn't experienced before, not because conflict disappeared, but because fear no longer lived here. I thought about Christmas dinner, about how everything had started with a punishment meant to make us smaller. Instead, it revealed something bigger: boundaries, truth, protection that didn't depend on approval. If you've ever reached a moment where choosing peace meant disappointing people who expected obedience, you understand why this ending didn't feel loud or victorious. It felt quiet, certain. I turned off the hallway light and closed her door gently. Ruth hadn't just left an inheritance. She had left a way out of a pattern, and the promise she made, that Maya would always be safe, finally made sense. Because safety wasn't about winning. It was about never teaching my daughter to shrink just to belong. And for the first time, our future felt entirely our own.